All right, everyone. First off, if you haven't had a chance to do so, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button as well as the bell notification icon. That way you don't miss out on any new content on the channel. And thankfully, by the time of me recording this video, we just crossed 32,000 subscribers. I mean, we're trucking along here. 40,000 is right around the corner. But obviously, the haves and have-nots episode that came on Tuesday, Team Arrivals, with the cliffhanger ending of Veronica getting pimp slapped by David, that took the internet by storm in terms of the Tyler Perry community. So this video about Joe Jackson, I wanted to do this obviously the past couple of days, but again, the haves and the have-nots takes priority on this channel. But that doesn't mean I won't do videos about other things in the music industry, entertainment, anything that I really want to share, any kind of thought-provoking videos. But this video, I don't know, maybe I'll title it, Joe Jackson, how should he be remembered? What would he be remembered most for? Now, first off, condolences to the family. Obviously, it was tough. Thankfully, though, Joe didn't pass on the 20, I believe, excuse me if I'm incorrect, but I believe the 26th was the anniversary of Michael Jackson's death, or was it the 25th? I think it was the 25th. But basically, it's sad because the family now, during those last few days of June, each June from now on, it's like going to be thinking about the loss of Michael, because next year is 10 years. And then, of course, a couple days later, it'll be the 1-year anniversary of Joe Jackson's passing. But again, condolences to the family. It's tough to lose them that close together. But when it comes to Joe Jackson, my gosh, I feel like it's pretty obvious. Like, this video isn't going to be bashing Joe Jackson. This video isn't quite praising Joe Jackson either, because personally, I never knew the man. I never met any of the Jackson family. Just being a fan of the music that had branched off from the Jacksons, whether it be Janet, Michael, the Jackson 5, the Jacksons, Jermaine, Tito, Marlon, and the list goes on. Most of them had solo careers, or at least a couple of solo albums. Maybe not, if they might not have been as big in mainstream as a Janet or a Michael, or even Jermaine to a certain degree. But in the simple fashion of the family itself, wow, Joe Jackson, I think that is pretty obvious that Joe's going to be mainly remembered. Like, if you say Joe Jackson, the first thing that'll pop in your mind is, the mental and physical abuse that he made his family endure for so long. And not to sugarcoat it, but there have been some interviews where there will be different celebrities and whatnot, and we'll just talk about how Joe was a monster. I think Brooke Shields even mentioned that in an interview. It's sad. I mean, maybe Brooke knows that from, her time with Michael, because in the early 80s, especially during like the Thriller era, they were seen a lot in public together. I think even at a few award shows as well. The one I can think of, was it the 84 or 85 AMA Awards? And I know he was carrying Webster in that one, but it's sad to think that even though this man is responsible for one of the most successful and famous, boy bands of all time, not just black boy bands, African-American boy bands, Jackson 5, but one of the most successful boy bands of all time. Man, it's something else. But basically, when it comes to Joe, I applaud him for raising a family of that size. I believe, after doing some research, he had 11 kids total. I think most people would say 10, but if I'm not mistaken, I think Marlon Jackson had a twin, but unfortunately he passed away during birth. So either way, it was he had double-digit amount of kids, and he had his own aspirations of being in the music business himself, but unfortunately he never made the big time. So one could say that he pushed his kids so hard for multiple reasons, because he wanted to live his musical ambitions, his musical dreams through his children. He wanted to push them so hard that they wouldn't have to endure the same kind of manual labor that he had to do on a daily basis at the I believe he was like a steel mill worker. And just the fact that he was a disciplinarian, that way he can keep his kids off the streets to, not get involved in gang activity or end up in jail, or even worse, or drugs or whatnot. So for that, you know, the odds were obviously stacked against him. Number one, African-American family. Number two, a large family at that. But he was able to raise the kids to cultivate their talent in order to make it to the big time. I mean, even before Michael Jackson was, well, Michael Jackson, the Jacksons were in the history books, you know, with the first songs from Motown from the group as the Jackson 5 were automatically number one. What was it? ABC, I Want You Back, The Love You Save, I'll Be There. Man, that's something else. And he was one hell of a business manager as well. You know, he knew how to get the job done and, you know, make the contracts and teach his kids about the business side of the music, you know, the importance of ownership of your song, songwriting, producing, and the list goes on, you know, how to invest your money. And regardless of how the Jacksons turned out outside of, let's say, a Janet or a Michael, you can't say they didn't have a time in their life where they had a lot of money in the bank. And, you know, what they did after that is, you know, what they did. But at the same time, it's just amazing how this one man was able to turn. Let's just put it this way. Joe Jackson wasn't limited by his surroundings. Like, he didn't let the fact that he was from, you know, I guess you could say a small town that was crowded with people where opportunity was limited. He didn't let that phase him and his kids. And that's amazing to think about. And the sad part is, you know, when I think about Joe Jackson, because if you ever watched The Jacksons, An American Dream, one of my favorite biopics of all time, obviously, you know, being African-American myself, I think it's safe to say that when it comes to black biopics, The Jacksons, An American Dream is right up there with, let's say, The Temptations, The Five Heartbeats, just to name a couple off the top of my head. And of course, you know, the New Edition story is the most recent biopic of an African-American boy group. New Edition, of course, BBD, Ralph Tresvant, Johnny Gill, Bobby Brown. But in the same vein, it's like, yeah, I mean, that movie, it really gave me a new perspective of Joe in terms of respect, because you have to look at everything you went through. Even though he was a business savvy man, a very, very good one, I think some of the choices he made were a bit extreme. Like, what was it? There were times where even before the Jackson 5, he would take his sons to like nightclubs and whatnot in order to perform. And one of the most unforgettable scenes was when, what was it? Michael and Marlon were looking at, what was it, like a stripper, and then it was like Jermaine and Jackie is like, no, go downstairs, and then they just stayed to watch. So yeah, but either way, Joe Jackson definitely left his mark, no pun intended, on the music business through his children. But at what cost? Even though his kids were able to, his family, because even if not all of his children were able to make the big time, like let's say LaToya, and what I mean by that is maybe they weren't able to make the same level of success as the Jacksons or Michael Jackson or Janet, but either way, his whole family was taken out of their, you know, low class living to, you know, the big time. The thing is, you know, none of them ended up in jail or anything, you know, minus the Michael molestation charges and whatnot. He didn't go to jail for that, but you know what I mean? None of them were like in court for drugs and all that other nonsense. He was able to take that family and move them and push them into superstardom. That's an amazing story. But the problem is, you know, at what cost? The fact that, at what cost, you know, the love, the lack of love, apparently, the mental scarring, the physical abuse, and not even being able to call Joseph father or daddy. He was always, no, I'm Joseph. It's like, even though he raised one of the most successful families of all time and famous families of all time, it's just like, what did it cost though? Like, yes, even though you were able to help your kids avoid being on the streets, getting involved with the wrong crowds and whatnot, make sure that money was one of the few things they ever had to worry about if they, you know, obviously handled it correctly. At what cost? I mean, money doesn't make up for love. I mean, to be honest now, crying while you're in a house or mansion that's paid for and whatnot beats being on the streets or something like that. But at the same time, you could be happy sitting on a curb with a puppy and whatnot. But when you're in a mansion, you feel lonely because you never felt that love. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I'm just speaking out from how I see things, because it's just shameful to think that all the times my heart goes out to the family. It really does, because we know, like Michael, what was it, Living with Michael Jackson, we talked about how the practices, the rehearsals were intense. Joe would be holding a belt, and if anybody made a misstep, that would be a whooping and whatnot. Not to mention the blunt objects that were used on him. One of my favorite parts of the Jackson and American Dream was when I think Joe was taking just a night stroll around the property, and then he saw one of the kids had left a towel by the pool, and he rushed up the stairs getting ready to beat someone. But then Catherine's like, no, none of these, no more. The beating's going to stop, Joe. You can't beat them and then behind the scenes, and then next thing you know, you put them on stage for the world to see, them perform. You can't do that no more. That was one of my favorite parts from the movie, and it really did resonate with Katherine Jackson as a person and as a mother to all of her children. And when it comes to Katherine, first of all, she just seems like a very sweet, nice person in general. Definitely the kind of person where if you met her in person, I could just tell she has a warm, welcoming personality. It's not the kind of person you could just walk up to and say, hi there. It's like, I feel like there's a hug coming if you meet Katherine in person. She's definitely a sweetheart. Based off the interviews that I've, seen on, like ET or just any other outlet, that, or even on YouTube, you just type in Katherine Jackson interview, and I think she had a 60-minute interview talking about Michael. I think it was a while ago, but it was good. And just a story, I feel like she has a lot of wisdom. And a lot of people, don't really know how to take Katherine, because of the fact it's like, well, you've seen how Joseph was beating your kids. I think Michael even said in an interview, and mom will be screaming like, Joe, stop, you're going to kill him. And it's just like, why didn't you do anything? And it's just like, man, or why didn't you leave? And to be honest, I'm not trying to make excuses, but I'm just trying to see, based off everything I know from, like autobiographies, the biopics, interviews from either Katherine or the kids themselves, it's kind of like, even back in those days, or even today to an extent, when you really think about it, when a woman is either married or in a relationship with a man, and they have a bunch of kids, they really, when you think about it, don't have much of a choice to leave, because, well, where are they going to go? Like, who's going to take them in? Who's going to take in somebody with like 7+ kids? Who's going to do that? So they choose to stay. And to be honest, it's kind of like, I can see the kids, even though Katherine was definitely the more loving of the parents, you wouldn't really trust her so much as in the fact that, how can you let daddy do that to us? Like, you see what's happening, but how are you going to let daddy do that to us? Because if anything, it was like they were ruled by fear of Joseph rather than, love. It's not respect, but just straight up terror, because even Michael was talking about how sometimes just the mere presence would make him faint or, regurgitate. And that's just a scary ass thought, especially that's your father, like your father, not some bully at school or, somebody that terrorized you. It's just your father. That's crazy. Now, not to get super personal, but I mean, my father's still alive, and, I'm 26, but here's my thing, like a lot of the stuff that's called abuse today was literally called discipline. I wasn't like, abused per se, but I feel like, sometimes I wish I was able to have those moments. There was a lot of people, my friends would talk about how, when they were growing up, they go fishing and everything with their dad and whatnot. I never really had those experiences. I mean, a couple of times, but my dad's not a patient man. Like, bringing little kids, me and my sister bringing little kids on a boat and then expecting us to be quiet. And then I remember one time we were at the lake at our grandparents, like his folks, so our grandparents' house. We were out on the lake, and we were talking. He literally pulled the boat back up to the shore, the land ground, whatever. I'm sorry, I haven't been on many boats, obviously. And, kicked us off, and that was it. Like, we never did that again. And, we got whoopings and whatnot. I wouldn't call them straight up beatings, but sometimes, it would get a bit physical. But at the same time, I really felt that there was definitely more fear than any sort of love. Like, there really aren't, like, I remember there being times where it would just be the two of us in the house and not a word will be exchanged all day. Like, even when I go home now, I'm 26, even when I visit home, hey, how's it going? And, that's about it. Maybe like, I'm going to the store, you need anything, something like that, but never full on conversations, because I felt like there's never been an understanding between us, like, interest. Like, believe it or not, I was that, probably because I was that kid, like the boy that was in, the Pokemon, the Power Rangers. I was book smart, so I was always reading or watching documentaries. I had no interest in going to the racetrack or, hunting and stuff like that. So I always had the, you need to be like Chaffetz. He was some kid from his hometown, Scottsburg. So basically, he was, Chaffetz was a kid around my age who was, obviously, a man's man, a boy doing all the things, playing sports and whatnot. I wasn't that kid, so I never felt like I was good enough. So thinking about that, look at Michael and what the Jacksons went through, and it's kind of like I can't even begin to imagine what they went through, because just like Joe, him feeling uncomfortable around his dad, like my dad, those talks, like most of the time it was like the parents fighting and whatnot, or him cursing and yelling. I remember one time my dad like ripped the phone. I'm talking like, a house phone, not a cell phone, just ripping the darn phone out of the wall because he accused my mom of cheating and threw it out the front door. So there were times like, we're sitting around watching TV, like the whole family, and he'll literally open his mouth and I would just freeze, because I would assume somebody's about to get cussed out or hit. And it was just like, oh, I'm about to go to bed or something like that. That was fear. But again, just speaking from my experience, I can't even imagine what the Jacksons went through. Like, just the fear. So it's a shame that even though he had a hand in creating one of the most legendary families of all time in entertainment, that they had to go through that. So I really do feel like Katherine, I feel bad for her, but I feel worse for the kids, because really the parents are supposed to protect them, but how can that happen when one of the parents is like physically and mentally abusing you? And mentally, honestly, physical wounds, they heal over time, but the mental scarrings will stay forever. It's something else when you think about it. And just piggybacking off of the mental stuff, you move even further into the fact that this is a family that's in the spotlight nearly 24/7, especially. And I know I really harken back to Michael the most because, well, he's had the most in-depth interviews, as well as his autobiography, Man in the Mirror. And then, of course, the Jacksons' American Dream, where you got a perspective of most of, if not all, the Jacksons. But really, Michael Jackson was in the forefront, kind of making a comparison to Bobby Brown in New Edition. Most people in terms of the media will flock towards Bobby Brown, but not so much the rest of the group. But, and more about his story, with Whitney and drugs and everything, more than the story of like Johnny with LSG, or, Mike Bivins creating Boys to Men and ABC. And, the list goes on from there. But when it comes to Michael, just talking about the fact that, especially him being, I feel like mainly it's because Michael was the youngest of the group. So obviously the mental toll would be the most effective on him, as opposed to the older brothers, like let's say a Jackie or Jermaine, who were a bit older than Michael was at the time. So when you think about Michael always being under that pressure, not just the family as well, especially, let's just focus on the Jackson 5 for one, because one misstep, you can just think it's one thing to mess up on national television or on stage at a concert, and you might be a little nervous about, oh well, the fans saw it, but you would be more worried about the fact that you would probably have that memory of what would happen if you do mess up. And then Papa Joe got the belt. Like, you can imagine them in the studio doing a choreography for like ABC, and they might imagine Joe just being there, like even when he wasn't there, his mere presence and the terror. It's even, damn, that's a scary ass thought just to think about, especially for kids. And just the fact that they never really had a normal life because they were pushed into stardom so much. And then the mental, just the heckling and being made fun of, like Michael being made fun of for his acne. Like, it's one thing for fans to do that, but to have your father do that as well. And then we saw what kind of effect it had in his plastic surgery in the future as his life went on until the time he died. And that just is like, again, Bobby Brown is like the poster boy for not doing drugs, and Michael the same thing with plastic surgery. But even so, even more important than that, I feel like Michael is a symbol for, you shouldn't let what people say affect you, because if it does, you'll end up breaking yourself. It's like people will throw rocks at a glass house, and Michael was that house. And it's like, even though those rocks will make some cracks and some dents, the worst damage of all comes from the inside. So even when, you know, people are mentally and physically hitting you on the outside, as long as you just maintain that your confidence, your beliefs in yourself, and you're able to positivity and optimism, then you can withstand that. But if you allow all that to just see, if you let those rocks that fly through the windows of that glass house remain inside of you, they're going to end up doing a lot more damage than anything else. I don't even know where that metaphor came from, but hey, you know, I'm just going to roll with it. And sadly, you know, that's why we saw he was all, well, for a lack of a better phrase, jacked up. I'm going to be honest here. I'm a Michael fan, but, you know, obviously he wasn't all himself, and he wasn't all there physically or mentally. It's just a shame that, and I'm not even going to blame Michael, because even though, you know, he was the one that paid for the surgery and went to this and that, it's just like, when you think about it, you got to think about all the pressures that was put on him as a child, not just by his father, but then you get to the Motown, like even in American Dream, there are like when he didn't want to get on planes because he was afraid of heights and stuff like that, or, you know, being chased by crowds, and it would be terrifying him because he didn't like, you know, that much attention, you know, being chased like that. It was like, well, you know, it's better to be famous than not be recognized at all. It's like, Michael, all these people are counting on you. If you don't go, it's like all that pressure literally crumbled him, and it was something else. It's something else. So, you know, from there we have Joe cheating on Katherine. That was in the movie. And one of the most heartbreaking things out of the Jackson film was towards the end, right before they did the Love You Save and We Thank You, in the movie closed out. It was just that conversation that Michael and Katherine had after the Pepsi incident. And I think, you know, Stephanie Mills' Home was playing over. I think it was, yeah, it wasn't the Diana Ross version. I think it was Stephanie Mills. And, you know, he's sitting there with Bubbles, and then Katherine comes up and asks to sit beside him. And and again, it relates to my childhood. Michael asking, you know, I always thought you'd leave, Joe. Everything he put you through. And she didn't. And I definitely relate to that. I came from one of those households where I was just waiting for my parents to get a divorce, but it never happened. So I guess that's why I relate to Michael a lot, especially because we both had the same birthday. Obviously, I wasn't born the same year as him, but August 29th, that's my birthday as well. And yeah, it's just a shame, because you really think your father will be in your corner. And even though he's really, you know, pushing you to success, he's one of the toughest critics and the one person you think you can run to when the whole world is against you. But he's not always there. But, you know, credit to him for being at the court, like in what, 2000, was it 2002 to early 2000? Like, you know, he was there with Michael. And it's a shame because all that pressure pushes children away. I mean, you just look at the fact that he never wanted anything to interfere with the group, whether his kids getting married or going solo and stuff like that. And that was one of the harshest things, because, you know, you always wanted Michael to be part of the Jackson 5. But, you know, when you're behind the scenes managing, that's different. It's easy for you to say, oh no, the group's going to stay together. But when you have the superstar of the group out in the front who's being held back because of the whole family, like, hey, like Katherine, that was one of the things I didn't like about Katherine in the movie. It's like, you know, do it for Joe, you know, the American dream, and do it for the family. I remember when he was recording Human Nature and he was walking through the backyard with all his animals and whatnot. And then Katherine was like, well, your brothers, they just want to be, look, I know that you want to try these new things and these songs that have been in you that you always wanted to put out, but your brothers just want to be a part of it. And he's like, no, this is something I had to do by myself. And they had to understand that. And it's just interesting to me. You know, one thing I will say about Joe, even though if Michael never went solo, I'm not going to say that the likes of Bad or Dangerous or Thriller would never have happened, because obviously Thriller still happened because he was still with the Jacksons, because the Victory Tour. Yeah, basically Bad and everything moving from there. I don't think those projects wouldn't have happened. Things would have been a bit different, though. I feel like, you know, the fact that the Victory Tour was such I guess you could say, a disaster. It wasn't as bad as New Edition's Home Again tour, but the Victory album itself was like a hot mess because at that point, you know, Michael had put out Thriller. It was post Motown 25. So Michael was the it thing. So the brothers themselves, you know, obviously it's like, yo, Michael doing his thing. Yo, I want to write and produce more too. So the Victory album to me is kind of like the Jackson's version of Michael Jackson's Butterflies, because, you know, that album itself was something that was just too many cooks in the kitchen. Like, there was no symmetry to it. There was no real flow. Like, it was kind of all over the place. Based off my listening of the album, you know, Torture is probably is one of my favorite Jackson family songs. I mean, I'm talking from the entire catalog of the Jacksons, Janet, Michael. That's definitely one of my top songs right there. But yeah, looking at some articles and reading through the books, you know, like the ticket sales, basically, yeah, the Victory tour was horrible. And the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, it was said that none of the Victory album songs were performed on the tour. It was stuff from like the Jackson catalog and Michael and Jermaine solo. So yeah, it really wasn't anything about the Victory. Like, it was more of a defeat. And that was like Michael's, pretty much the Victory album was kind of like a favor to the family. Like, look, I want to do one more thing with y'all, and then I want to do my own thing. So what I mean about Joe, if he stayed in the group, if Michael stayed in the group, would he still be alive today? I'm going to be honest, maybe, nothing's for sure. But, you know, with the whole child stuff, I doubt that if Joe was still maintaining the reins, I don't think it would have happened. Like, that's just my opinion. That just shows you, like, sometimes, you know, Michael, even though he was blowing up into a superstar, I think he still needed people in his circle that weren't afraid to tell him no, that weren't afraid to put him in line. But I can understand, because when Michael got that freedom, it was something he felt for the first time in his entire career. Because remember, as a little kid, up until, you know, Motown 25 and beyond, it was Papa Joe running the show. It was Papa Joe, you know, running things, beatings and stuff like that, and being told what to do. So in a way, you can almost say that, I guess one way I like to put it is, Bad, you know, with the jacket and everything, that was kind of like Michael's rebellious stage. Because remember, even as a teenager, when he wanted to, I remember Katherine was saying in an interview that there were some, you know, lawyers and whatnot saying, hey, Michael's going to go solo. And it's like, no, he's not. He's not eight. Well, I think it was maybe, was he around 18 at the time? Basically, he hadn't finished school or anything. And it's like, well, tell the brothers to save their money because he's going solo. It's like, no, Michael's not going solo, because Michael might not need them, but they need him. So basically, yeah, I think Bad, in a way, could be represented as Michael Jackson's rebellious stage. You know, the fact that he was finally able to break free and do his own thing, you know. No parents, no brothers, not really having anybody relying on him in terms of, I don't have to let my own star diminish just for the sake of helping my family make it along. So I never really thought of, I'm going to be honest, I never really thought of Bad as that. So that's pretty cool when you think about it. It makes me respect the album even more. But in any case, you know, Joe Jackson as a whole, I think, you know, even though the scars are still there, I believe in one interview, Michael Jackson was saying that when it comes to the Michael Jackson estate, there was an annual Joe Jackson Day where it was all about celebrating Joe, because love him or hate him, there would be no Jackson success if it wasn't for Joe Jackson. So, I mean, that's a fact. That's a fact. And, you know, looking back, Joe Jackson definitely was a person of negative traits, you know, obviously a skilled businessman. It was kind of like he pushed business before family. The end result, yes, a very successful, wealthy, famous family. But even though the family, especially after Michael's passing and whatnot, and royalties and all that other good stuff, you know, you might have millions in the bank, but what do you got in your heart? I mean, the emptiness, like, sad to say that, you know, obviously a part of him is sad that, you know, he's being buried, but a part might be relief, might be freedom. The fact that it's like the man that terrorized us is now gone. I mean, that's a sad ass thing to think about, but you know, that pain doesn't go away, man. Like, you know, especially when you get inflicted with that mental abuse as a kid, it's kind of like, you know, that bully's finally gone. I'm going to miss him, but at the same time, and like, hopefully the family can move on from that, not just in terms of the grief of losing their father, but also the scarring that he left behind. You know, like I said, I don't know the whole family dynamic, you know, especially in the later years, so maybe they were all able to make amends. If I'm not mistaken, Katherine got separated from Joe for a few years, you know, obviously before he passed, but I did hear that she was by his side during his you know, final days. And Paris Jackson put out a very well written tweet about how she cherishes the last, you know, few moments that she had with him and was able to talk about the things they, you know, she always wanted to talk about. So that was good. So, you know, rest in peace regardless. You know, despite the kind of man he was, hopefully he was able to find the American dream after all. You know, despite, I always wondered that, you know, like Michael Searching for Neverland, you know, that was that biopic that came out recently, but, you know, was, I guess you could say, was Joe Jackson's American dream ever truly fulfilled? That's what I want to know. But with that being said, just to kind of wrap things up here, I hope the family, I wish them the best. Hopefully they can come together and you know, keep on moving forward. But before ending this video, I just have to say that one of my favorite YouTubers, History in the Mix, I believe it is a young Michael Jackson fan. I found his channel a few months ago. I've been binge watching some of those videos on repeat. I believe he's like maybe 15 or 16 years old, but this guy is truly a Michael fan. I think at the time he has about 6,000 subscribers. You know, this channel itself is over 32,000 subscribers. So if you're a Michael Jackson fan, I want to put a link to his video below where he talks about Joe Jackson. I mean, this dude right here, I swear, he's only 15 or 16. And I really feel like this guy's channel is going to blow up in the coming years. You know, the fact that he's so young, but he has such an in-depth knowledge of Michael because he does his homework. It shows in the video. So I would definitely recommend checking out History in the Mix. There is a link to his Joe Jackson video in the description below. Explore the channel, guys. He talks about all things Michael and the Jacksons. Definitely a treat if you go over there to give him some love. But thanks so much for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts about Joe Jackson. How will he be remembered? How should we remember him? Obviously, there's that asterisk. I mean, when Joe Jackson comes up, I feel like most, if not everybody, will first think about child abuser, unfaithful husband. But at the same time, one hell of a businessman, and was able to create some of the most successful entertainers of all time. So thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you subscribe to this channel, and I'll talk to you all soon.